When one of the most legendary bands in history broke up, all the members of this band released solo projects almost immediately. The first member of this old band to have a #1 hit was a bit of a surprise, and he ended up having one hell of a solo run, but his biggest hit would also become his greatest trial. He got sued for sounding too much like another big hit from years before. It was a catastrophic lawsuit that nearly destroyed this legend and plagued his career for years, because it put him in a never-ending bout with writer's block and stopped him from recording for years. But in the end, he would have the last laugh. You got to hear the story. Rock's most honest songwriter dealing with alleged plagiarism. This is a story. You got to hear it to believe it. It's coming up on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you've ever lifted up your lighter at a concert, old school, when your favorite band plays that all-time ballad, you're going to dig this channel. Make sure to subscribe below right now and be sure to hit that bell so that you never miss a video. This is the story straight from the legends. Beatle George Harrison grew up in a devout Catholic home. But when he reached adulthood, he found that the Christian doctrine that he was taught as a boy left him unfulfilled. At the height of Beatlemania, George began a quest for enlightenment, and he found it when he discovered the Hare Krishna movement. In 1969, with the breakup of the Beatles looming, George met Swami Prabhupada, the founder of the movement, and that meeting changed his life. George stated that the meeting with the Swami opened the door to his subconscious, and it ignited a creative awakening that foreshadowed the making of My Sweet Lord, a manifesto of spiritual unity that was one of the biggest international pop hits of 1971. Overshadowed by the dominance of John Lennon and Paul McCartney, George Harrison's prowess as a lyricist and song composition, it was not widely known. We talked about this before, but it wasn't until his song Something and Here Comes the Sun were included on the Beatles album Abbey Road that fans and music critics began to take notice of George Harrison's talents beyond his musicianship. Something in the way she woos me. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. During press interviews in 1969, Harrison proclaimed his desire to make his own recordings. I mean, he had written over 100 songs from that time. When McCartney announced that he was leaving the Beatles and the breakup of the band was a foregone conclusion, Harrison committed to creating a solo record. Even though he had recorded the all-instrumental album Wonderwall Music in '68 and the avant-garde electronic sound in early '69, Harrison had aspirations of putting all of his ideas and passion together with a big producer and a coterie of vaunted musicians. George had a ton of material for his new LP going back to 1965. Like I said, he'd written all these songs that were rejected by Lennon and McCartney for Beatles records. There was a tune called All Things Must Pass, and that became the title track to the Emergent album. My Sweet Lord, that started to flow in 1969. That was when Harrison was in Copenhagen with his pals Eric Clapton and Billy Preston as guest artists on Delaney and Bonnie's European tour. As Billy Preston remembered it, the origin of My Sweet Lord came from improvisation. Preston recalled that Harrison asked him about how to write a gospel song during that Delaney and Bonnie tour. So in the backstage area of one of the venues they performed in, Billy sat down at a piano and he played some gospel-flavored chords while the Bramletts, Delaney and Bonnie, and their backup singer Rita Coolidge, they sang Oh My Lord and Hallelujah. Harrison channeled into the soulfulness of that moment, and he began to write the verses for My Sweet Lord. My sweet Lord. Harrison's design was to write a mantra to eliminate dogmatism. In his mind, religion should bring people together, not divide them. He imagined a song of unity, brotherhood, and reconciliation between the multitude of religious beliefs. Harrison thoughtfully blended the Hebrew word hallelujah, that was commonly used in Christianity, with chants of Hare Krishna from a Vedic prayer. It was a chance for George Harrison to share his mission to forge a direct relationship with his Lord, expressing himself in words that everyone could understand, regardless of their beliefs. My sweet Lord, oh my Lord.
My sweet Lord.
Putting together a song like My Sweet Lord was a very ambitious challenge for the revered ex-Beatle. Harrison's goal was to open up the boundaries of philosophy with a song that was very clear and very beautiful. As we continue to dissect this immaculate song, I want to take a second and recognize our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. Right now at Zenni.com, you can get a complete pair of prescription glasses starting at just $6.95. You heard that right, $6.95. Prescription, reading glasses, sunglasses, blue light, and protective wear, they're all available at Zenni.com. Again, if you go there today, you choose your pair, you design them, and then you can see how you look before you buy it. You're going to love it. Before My Sweet Lord was developed at EMI Studios with Phil Spector and Harrison co-producing, it was one of 30 songs in the running to be chosen for All Things Must Pass, one of the greatest albums ever. Spector was amazed at the wealth of material that Harrison had accumulated. However, George was reluctant at first to fully commit to recording My Sweet Lord, since the song had such a strong religious message. George called recording My Sweet Lord sticking his neck on a chopping block. Very true. Now, ultimately, George's desire to pour his heart and soul into that track prevailed over his fear of public scorning. The sessions for the recording of My Sweet Lord were legendary campfire tales of rock and roll fantasy. I've been very blessed to hear some of those firsthand. Although the memories of who was truly involved in the recording of Harrison's epic track are foggy at best, let's have some fun imagining the star power that has been thrown around by a lot of different accounts. Inside EMI Studios, now known as Abbey Road Studios, there's an incredible ensemble of musicians working on My Sweet Lord, some credited, some not credited. It's been reported by Beatles historians that the list of players included George Harrison on lead and backing vocals, acoustic and slide guitar. There was Eric Clapton on acoustic guitar, and all four members of Apple Records signee Badfinger. There was Tom Evans, Joey Moland, and Pete Ham on acoustic guitar, along with Mike Gibbons on tambourine. Moland stated that in an effort to achieve the resonant guitar sound on My Sweet Lord, he and his Badfinger mates were asked to play inside a plywood structure that was partitioned from the rest of the performers. Billy Preston was on piano, Gary Wright on piano, from Dreamweaver fame. John Barham on harmonium, Klaus Vormann on bass, there's Ringo Starr and Jim Gordon from Derek and the Dominos on drums. One of the uncredited musicians on the recording was actually Peter Frampton, who also contributed acoustic guitar licks. And it is believed that John Lennon was also in the house to strum on My Sweet Lord. Here's what George's good friend Gary Wright said about the band and those sessions.
One day I was in the control room and the phone rings and it's the receptionist saying, "It's Klaus Vormann, can I put him through?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Gary, I'm in the studio in Abbey Road with George Harrison. He's doing his new solo album and Phil Spector's producing. They need another keyboard player. Are you free now? Can you come right over?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll be right there." And I literally flew over to Abbey Road and not knowing what to expect. I walk into the studio and there's Eric Clapton, Ringo, Billy Preston, Badfinger, George, all these people. I was like totally blown away.
Wow.
George was really sweet though. He was very friendly and warm, and he immediately disarmed any apprehensiveness that I had.
George Harrison performed all the vocals on the chorus of My Sweet Lord, but the liner notes humbly named the fictitious George O'Hara Smith singers as the additional backing vocals. The George O'Hara Smith singers were actually George Harrison, Phil Spector, and Eric Clapton. Now, 3 or 4 members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness would walk into the studio as guests of Harrison, all painted up and robed, tossing rose petals in the room and handing out peanut butter cookies for the working musicians. That would have been a sight to see. Now, prior to delivering the master recording of All Things Must Pass to the U.S. representative of Apple Records in New York City, Harrison declared that there would be no single release from the forthcoming album. The executives at Apple Records, of course, had other ideas. Not only did they want Harrison to condense the album down to a single disc, they also informed him that they were convinced that there were 3 surefire hits on the record. The 3 were What Is Life, My Sweet Lord, and Isn't It a Pity? Phil Spector recounted that he got in a huge fight with Harrison and Harrison's then manager Alan Klein, insisting that My Sweet Lord must be a single. Despite the discord, My Sweet Lord was chosen to be the lead single release from All Things Must Pass, and of course it was a runaway smash. Now, the single was certified gold on December 14, 1970, with sales well over 1 million units. It rose to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 just 2 weeks later. It held that top spot for 4 weeks. At the same time, All Things Must Pass was the number 1 album on the Billboard Albums chart. My Sweet Lord was a number 1 single in more than 20 countries around the world, including George's home country, where it also achieved the honor of being designated as the biggest single of 1971 in the UK. Billy Preston's version of My Sweet Lord that received a modicum of airplay in Europe when it was a single in September 1970. That was pretty much it, though. The U.S. release of the album was delayed several months because of its futility in Europe, but it actually was set to be released just a month after George's recording dropped as a single. It happened all the time back then, different people, sometimes in the same circles, recording songs. Following Harrison's fantastic success with his single release of My Sweet Lord, Preston's version reaped the benefits. It cracked the Billboard Hot 100. It went to number 90. Also made a solid impression on the soul singles chart, where it peaked at number 23. Yes, there was much benevolence in the universe for My Sweet Lord, until negative temporal forces that every faith warns of formed a dark cloud of just soul-crushing agony on George Harrison. My Sweet Lord became the subject of a much publicized copyright infringement case. Maybe the most infamous case of copyright infringement in music history. It was alleged that Harrison's My Sweet Lord was too close to the melody and song structure of Ronnie Mac's composition, He's So Fine. That was a huge hit in 1963 for the Chiffons, one of the first all-girl groups of the rock era. Great song. I used to love it as a kid. In 1976, Harrison was found to have subconsciously plagiarized the song, a verdict that had repercussions throughout the music industry. Rather than the Chiffon song, George claimed he used the out-of-copyright Christian hymn, Oh Happy Day, as the inspiration for that melody. Under sworn testimony, George Harrison stated emphatically, following the pattern of He's So Fine never crossed his mind. Nevertheless, the court analyzed both hits and concluded that My Sweet Lord is the same song as He's So Fine with different words. And Harrison had access to He's So Fine, is what they found. He's so fine. Under the law, that was textbook infringement of copyright, and is no less so even though George had no conscious intention of imitating He's So Fine. The ruling, it set new legal precedent and was a personal blow for George Harrison, who said that he was too paranoid to write anything new for some time afterwards. The normally zen George Harrison lost his creative zeal for a period of time. For many years, George was too paranoid to write any new songs. George didn't really bounce back until 1981 with his much celebrated project Somewhere in England, an album featuring his comeback single, The Reworking of All Those Years Ago, serving as a tribute to his murdered bandmate John Lennon. Actually, the song scaled all the way to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. That's one that should have been a number 1 hit for sure. In an unbelievable twist of irony, though, Harrison's former manager Alan Klein purchased the music publishing catalog owned by Bright Tunes that included the rights to He's So Fine. Klein established a really nasty reputation for swindling his famous clients like Sam Cooke, the Beatles, and the Stones. Here's an example of his questionable business practices. Harrison had fired Klein by the time he bought Bright Tunes, and Klein offered to sell some of the rights to He's So Fine to George Harrison. Harrison countered that Klein acted improperly by purchasing Bright Tunes, and the court actually ruled in his favor, which meant that Harrison would pay a greatly reduced amount of back royalties to Klein's company as the owner of He's So Fine, and Harrison would then receive the rights to My Sweet Lord and the song's nemesis, He's So Fine. You following? It's pretty cool. To summarize that very complicated and exhausting lawsuit, Bright Tunes versus Harris Songs, the case was officially concluded in March of 1998. 22 years after it was initially filed in court, with George Harrison retaining the rights to My Sweet Lord and He's So Fine. What an ordeal. In his 1993 essay on the case, Bright Tunes versus Harris Songs, Joseph Self described it as one of the longest-running legal battles ever to be litigated in the United States. In every book I've read on George Harrison, all the people that I've interviewed or talked to who worked with him, they describe George as an amazing person with a spirit that exuded joy and positivity.
Give me love, give me love, give me.
George especially was so friendly and generous. He would always bring gifts for me. If he's come over to the house, he'd bring me a jacket or a hat or whatever. I learned a lot from him about being a good person, really.
Give me life, give me life.
Just as Hinduism changed the life of George Harrison, meeting George Harrison changed the lives of the people that he came into contact with. His music, of course, had the same effect on listeners when they heard his wonderful, mystical songs. Although George was not the prolific songwriter that his colleagues Lennon and McCartney were, My Sweet Lord, his debut single as a solo artist, was the first to hit number 1 by a former Beatle. He would have been more prolific had he been given more chances. According to a chart published by PPL, Phonographic Performance Limited, in August 2018, My Sweet Lord has received the most airplay in the 21st century of any song released by Apple Records, ahead of John Lennon's Imagine and the Beatles' Hey Jude. The info coincided with the 50th anniversary of the founding of Apple Records, the label, of course, once owned by the Beatles.
Imagine there's no heaven. Hey Jude, don't make it bad.
In 2014, My Sweet Lord was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, which is a really much-deserved posthumous tribute of the songwriting brilliance of George Harrison.
My sweet Lord.
My Sweet Lord, its majestic spirituality compelled many artists to do their own interpretation of the song. The list includes covers by Johnny Mathis, Nina Simone, Edwin Starr. There's also Aretha Franklin, Peggy Lee, even the Chiffons.
My sweet Lord. Hey,
I'll leave the last word on George Harrison to his dear friend, Gary Wright.
Then as time went on, George and I went on several holidays together. We took the QE2 from New York to Southampton, just outside of London. And when we went to Portugal several times, Hawaii, and we were just good friends. And I miss him dearly. He was a really close friend and a real inspiration for me in my life. He helped me in my music. He got me on the Dick Cavett show. He really wanted to help me in any way he could in my career. And I really, really am totally, grateful for everything he did for me.
Leave us a comment about George Harrison and this immaculate, beautiful song. What are your memories of this track? What do you think about the lawsuit and about everything we've talked about? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video and if you like our channel, please subscribe below. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Make sure to get your tickets to Professor of Rock Live right down below and check us out on Patreon. All these things help us keep the music alive, and that's what we're here for. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. Talk to you soon.